When I arrived in Hallfield Prison, I thought I'd finally gone to the place where my aimless life would end, because from the outset, I thought life in prison was similar to how it was portrayed in the movies, where some of the prisoners got raped and killed. 2 weeks later, I went to the prison's library and borrowed a book. And that night, while I was reading that book, I suddenly realized I could identify my own life with the life story of the main character in the book. Later, I started to reflect on my own life, how I lived it without much fundamental direction, the things I did to survive, and the physical and emotional pain that I endured throughout my youthful days. I also thought about my son, who was 2 years old at the time, and at that point I decided to document my life story, hoping that it might get into his hands if the worst should occur and I got killed. Thus, he would at least get to know how his dad had lived his life and maybe forgive me for not being there for him. I also had hoped that, unlike me, he may choose a different path on his own journey through life. Before I got introduced to education, I was angry. I was angry with the world. I was angry with the police for arresting me. I was angry with my parents for not affording me a better life. And I was angry with myself for being such a fool. I realized that I'd been living in a very dark place for a long time. My anger was only a form of self-defense, and to shield myself, I would often wear my street face whenever I was around the other prisoners. But once I found education, everything changed, and I wasn't angry anymore. I used to go to the library and borrowed one book. Now I was borrowing 5, the maximum each prisoner were allowed to borrow for the week. As time went by, I realized that Her Majesty's prison was not a bad place for me. In fact, I must admit that going to prison was one of the best things that could ever have happened to me. During the months and years that followed, I continued to write the story of my life. It had become my daily routine. It was something that I would always look forward to do. In fact, it was my secret cleansing therapy. Writing about my previous life helped me to recognize who I was. I was able to examine myself in ways that I never thought was possible, and I must admit that I was very embarrassed with my findings. I was also ashamed. I was ashamed of some of the things I had done in the past to survive, and I was even more ashamed of the crime that I committed, of which I was doing the time for. And when I thought about whom I could and wanted to be for my son, I knew I had to change. I knew I had to be clean, because I was dirty. My whole life was messed up from when I first started to steal and take drugs. And I didn't want my son to grow up thinking it was trendy and cool to take drugs, steal, and ultimately go to prison like his dad. And the only way I could guide my boy in a different direction than the one I had taken was to change my life. I committed my first crime between the tender ages of 8 and 9. I was home alone and hungry, as I hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. Without having a second thought, I entered my neighbor's house. My heart was beating rapidly against the wall of my chest as I hurriedly searched the cupboards for food, but I only found half of a loaf of bread. I saw a black Bible on top of a table, and like a magnet to steal, the Bible drew me closer. Curious, I opened the Bible, and to my surprise, a small stock of banknotes smiled at me from between the pages. So I pocketed the money, jumped out the window, and I ran inside my house. In July 1997, I got arrested for an attempted armed robbery and subsequently rewarded with an 8-year sentence. It was the first and last time I have been to prison. Most importantly, it was a crime that changed the whole context of my life. Today, I'm a published author of the first part of a trilogy entitled Victor of Circumstances. I decided to share my life story with the world, hoping that it might encourage others to examine themselves and change their lives for the better, regardless of where they are from or how messed up their lives have been. As for my son, He didn't only turn out to be an incredible, law-abiding young man, but the only person that I know of in my whole family to graduate from a comprehensive high school. My friends, I can proudly tell you that my life had changed for the better because I put in the hard work, and I can smile every day because my son and my 13-year-old daughter are like fresh water to my soul. They are my role models. One love, one heart, respect.